Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this special conversation with Deesha Philyaw and Brian Broome. This is one of the most anticipated sessions of 1455's third annual Summerfest. I couldn't be more excited. I'm going to start by reading the description of this panel because I think this captures what I believe we're going to talk about today, and then I'll introduce Brian and Deesha. I wrote, "This last year hasn't been all bad. Indeed, on the literary front, there have been some wonderful developments in 2021. It has confirmed the arrival of two superstars, Deesha Philyaw and Brian Broome. Their books, both critically lauded and commercial hits, have shattered conventional and in many ways outdated conventional industry wisdom, proving that great writing will find an audience. I'm beyond excited to have a candid discussion with these two authors, and we're looking for them to speak of their experiences before and especially after publication of their breakthrough titles, and their patient and far from painless path to publication, which I hope is inspiring and informative for everyone that's checking this out. And not last, their unique and to me very inspiring friendship, which we'll talk about because 1455 is all about the community. So let me introduce them both. First, Deesha Philyaw. Her debut short story collection, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, won the 2021 Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction, the 2021 Story Prize, and was a 2020 LA Times Book Prize, as well as a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction. This book focuses on Black women, sex, and the Black church, and is being adapted for television by HBO Max with Tessa Thompson as executive producer. Deesha is also the Cambilio Fiction Fellow and will be the 2022-2023 John and Renee Grisham Writer in Residence at the University of Mississippi. Next to her is Brian Broome, who is a poet and screenwriter. He's a K. Leroy Irvis Fellow and instructor in the writing program at the University of Pittsburgh. He's been a finalist in the Moth Storytelling Competition and won the grand prize in Carnegie Mellon University's Martin Luther King Writing Awards. He also won a Van Award from Pittsburgh Black Media Federation for Journalism in 2019. And most recently, by the way, he's author of the critically revered memoir, Punch Me Up to the Gods. They both currently live in Pittsburgh. So, A, welcome, friends. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And B, I want to just set it up by a little backstory, which I actually think epitomizes where we are today, at least from my perspective. There's a chain of events that have reached fruition today, and it really does speak to when 1455 talks about we celebrate creativity and build community. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? This panel epitomizes it. I was delighted to meet Deesha leading up to last year's Summer Festival, which she was a participant in, and predictably, I was blown away by her reading and said, "You've got a book coming out. Let's have you as a featured author," which we did in the fall, and that was amazing. And by the way, you can check that out on 1455's YouTube page. And shortly after that, I believe she mentioned that Brian Broome should be on my radar and said, "I've got a friend with a book coming out. He's going to be great for this series." So I said, well, duh, of course. And I started setting up, and I knew Brian was going to be big, A, because I read some of the blurbs, but then when I started talking to his people, they're like, yeah, how does May look? And you know, when you're organizing an event and you need 6 months lead time, that person's about to blow up and be busy. But through Deesha's work, I was able to meet Brian. We got something on the calendar, and we had an author event in May, which is also on the 1455 YouTube page. So I want to talk to these authors about their books and celebrate what's been an amazing ride. But I also want to dig a little deeper and really focus on their relationship, because it's this friendship that I've seen in action that brought both of them into my world. So I'm grateful to that. And, you know, I think it also speaks to, we really talk, I think, correctly about how we use these devices and they distract us and they keep us from connecting. But in this instance, you know, during a year when we couldn't get together, all this technology helped foster these conversations. And here we are on Zoom now, reaching a bunch of people across the world. So with that said, you both have been a little busy. Why don't we tee it up? What have you been up to? We know the books are great. They're being well received. They're going places. But Deesha, Brian, where are we circa July 2021?
Well, Brian and I were actually late June, early July, we were teaching at the same residency. Brian was teaching memoir and I was teaching epistolary writing. So that's where we've been most recently. And I, since coming back from that, I've been trying to get back into the groove of writing. I've been writing some essays, but also Lurking is my novel. And also, as you mentioned, Sean, the TV show, the adaptation. I still don't have a timeline for that, but I have a co-writer and we're starting to share some ideas. So that's what I've been up to.
Mr. Broome?
I have a question. Who is this woman? I don't know her. I mean, you said a bunch of, I don't know this woman from a can of paint. No, I didn't know at all that the writing of a book would then render you so busy, I had no idea. Like Deesha was trying to warn me, like everything that I have done has come like 3 or 4 steps after Deesha, has done it. And so she's a resource in terms of like what to expect. And so, it's, lots and lots of events, lots and lots of like contracts and things to look over. I have a wonderful film agent now. I am talking about like, overseas, like contracts, things like that, and just, this thing that I've put into the world has just consumed my life, which, is a good thing, it's a good thing. And I'm really grateful for it. But I've been really, really busy. Like literally it's something every day, sometimes all day, every day. But it's been a great experience.
That's wonderful. And I want to kind of belabor the point a little bit because my intro sounded almost a little too neat. I really want to emphasize the point and I really want to just celebrate Deesha's spirit. Shortly around the time that we were introduced, Brian, I just noticed on Facebook, she was as excited talking about your book and promoting it and getting people in front of it as she was about her own. And again, I'm not suggesting that this is incredibly unique, but again, since 1455, one of the things we genuinely, celebrate is it is a lonely existence. It's full of rejection. And in my modest experience, I've talked to a lot of writers who many people I think would give an arm to trade places with, but there's not necessarily happiness there, or you get on that train and you realize, wow, this isn't taking me to the destination that I thought. I'm suddenly, all my problems in life aren't fixed. And I think you two really epitomize something that inspires me, which is the literary industry, if not us, who needs to lift each other up. I mean, certainly it helps if you genuinely believe in the work and you're genuinely friends, but I think it warrants a little extra mention that Deesha showed, here's someone that was busy and blowing up for all the right reasons, and she made time. She enjoyed making time to raise her friend up. And that made a huge impression on me. And I think it's something anyone that's watching right now could take notes and recognize that A, that's the way to do it. But B, you might be surprised at the personal joy you get celebrating another writer's success.
It's really true. It's true.
I mean, I just want to second that. Like, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Deesha, sorry. But like her generosity is just unbelievable, and and I think that sometimes when you have success, there's this idea of, scarcity that Deesha and I talk about, like the scarcity idea, like if I have it, I have to hoard it, and everybody's my competition, and Deesha doesn't have that at all. I would never promote her book the way that she's promoted mine. Like I would never, tell people that they should immediately go out and buy this book. I would never do that. Like, it's just not in my nature to be such a salesman, that they should buy this book immediately because it is amazing. Just not in my nature. But no, I'm incredibly grateful to her. And again, I recognize how I got to where I am, and it was a lot of help from her. Just, not only as a sort of business partner, and telling me about business things, but just as a friend. And that has inspired me to want to help somebody else as well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Deesha.
No, that's fine. I was going to say, you're right, Sean. Brian and I talk about this a lot. lots of us, especially as Black writers, do, that it's not pie, it's not going to run out, even though, the industry would have Black writers believe that there can only be one. And what that does is it starts to condition you, if you let it, for competition, to see each other as competition through the lens of competition and not through the lens of care. And I always say, I'm just trying to be like Kiese Layman, the way that he, doors open, he opened doors and he walked through, but he also reaches back and he's bringing us with him. And each of us that he's, reached back to, then we reach back and we bring someone else, and we just keep it going. And we try to normalize that, because that's not always the case, and so Kiese has modeled that for me and others. I want to model that and be that for Brian and other writers, because none of us got here by ourselves. Absolutely none of us. If nothing else, it was the blurbs, having people write blurbs for you. But I can actually pinpoint it with Kiese. He was on a podcast called The Stacks and mentioned my book and said, everybody needs to read it. And all of a sudden the bookstagrammers, particularly the Black bookstagrammers, are like, we never heard of this woman, never heard of her book, but if Kiese said it, we should check it out.
Yeah.
And then my book just blew up. And so then when I said to Brian, I was like, I don't know what your publisher is telling you, but you've got to connect with these bookstagrammers. You've got to, connect in these ways. And here's some folks that you should know, and so forth. And so it's just, passing it along and really seeing our success as collective. I absolutely see Brian's success as a something to celebrate, celebrating him. We've had dinners and celebration, but also just celebrating him publicly, because I'm proud of him. I know that, how much work goes into a book in general, but I also know how hard he worked. He did something that I don't think I'll ever do. He told his own story. And I can't even fathom doing that. And so I'm so proud of him. And we poke at each other all the time. And I call him my frenemies. Is that right? Yes. Like frenemy, friend nemesis. That's it. He's my friend nemesis. But emphasis on the friend.
Yes.
Emphasis on the friend. I love him. I love you.
See?
To get all mushy about it. Like,
well, and listen, if so, those of you watching, if you aren't plugged in, follow there. If you need some uplift and genuine uplift in your social media feed, check these two out, because again, they're always paying it forward. They're talking about culture. Again, I think one of the reasons I'm so smitten with both of you is there's a genuine positivity, right? And I think that's also a lesson that we should celebrate, which is having a well-rounded life, being engaged with the world. Doesn't mean you've got to take political stances publicly, certainly, but being engaged outside of what we all would recognize as a very solitary endeavor. Writing the book, the work needs to get done. But I think what I've found is talking to a lot of authors, there is this, whether it's once the project is done, or even if, as I mentioned earlier, the project meets with success, if you don't have a network of friends that support you and vice versa, there's going to be something hollow about the whole endeavor. The other thing that I'd love you two to talk a little bit about that I really appreciated in our previous discussions, and it comes through in your work, and I wonder, I won't age any of us, but we are of a certain generation. We're not Gen Zers here, but you both in terms of your writing, but also the way you talk about your writing, you're both very eager to not only pay it forward, but recognize those that came before you. And I'm cognizant of the fact that there's an extra resonance, as Black Americans, in terms of speaking of underrepresented voices or voices that deserve to be heard now that weren't heard then. Talk a little bit about how you turn that into as positive a situation as possible by talking about your influences, because we're not just talking about style, right? I think a lot of white writers talk about, well, I read so-and-so and so-and-so and that changed my life. You both have talked specifically about kind of the shoulders that you've stood on. And I think there's just a beautiful respect and a necessary dialogue there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's thinking about, writers who were unapologetically Black and believe that our stories in their specificity as Black people could be still embraced universally, that our stories had resonance for our community, but also beyond our community. And so I'm thinking about Toni Morrison, I'm thinking about August Wilson, and both of them during, their careers were asked always by white reporters, like, don't you think you're limiting yourself? And it meant a lot to me, the way that they just basically handed those reporters their asses. Like, first of all, this is a terrible question, but that, Black life is enough, and that, we don't have to write beyond that if we don't want to, in order to still be considered serious artists, literary artists, in order to tell big stories, important stories, that we, our stories are enough. And so for me to believe that, as I do, and to write that way, and then to see it come to fruition in the reception to my book, meant a lot. I knew, because of Toni Morrison and August Wilson, that people who weren't Black women could still connect and find connection points in my stories and with my characters. I knew they could, I didn't know if they would. And so it's been exciting to see that, people have, because so many of us have mother-daughter issues. So many of us have been wounded by the church. So many of us are trying to get free, whatever that means. That's all universal. So I would say, those for literary forebearers are the ones that come to mind for me.
I I have a story of when, we were shopping my book, and my agent was shopping the book, and one of the people to whom she shopped it basically said, well, why would we want this? Now Damon Young is in the world, basically saying, like, we already have our book that was written by a Black man. And that was like my first realization, like, oh, this is going to be the same old shit, right? Like, this literary world isn't going to be like, free of this bullshit that I've been dealing with my whole life. Deesha named some writers. I think back to, obviously, James Baldwin, who I mentioned in the book, but I also think about Marlon Riggs, who was a Black gay author and a performance artist and musician, and just an amazing presence, And when I think of those two men who had so much in common with me, like, just on the surface, I thought to myself at one point, how dare I be so afraid all the time? How dare I, like, try to hide, because these two men have blazed trails for me, And so definitely, proud to be a part of that legacy, if I am, right? Also, since the book has come out, again, like Deesha said, I've heard from so many people. I've heard some people who are just on some old bullshit, but, like, I've also heard from people who, from all walks of life, who say to me, I really related to your story. My father was like that, or I felt like that, or, the publishing industry, I mean, really should start thinking about human beings instead of to whom they can market this story. Human beings share a lot of common experiences, a lot of commonality. And so, yeah, it's a great feeling when I do get an email from somebody who says, your book made me feel seen, and again, I think it was James Baldwin who said something, and I'm paraphrasing, like, you think your experience is solitary in the world until you read books, and that is what connects us all. So I always try to think about that when I'm writing.
I appreciate both of you expounding on that, and I would say there's a real, that's another teachable moment for writers of all ages, which is it sounds very trite, I think, on the surface, but if you're trying to chase literary trends for whatever reason, you're trying to kind of cynically game the system. First of all, there's no shortcuts. but secondly, both in terms of personal gratification, which is important, and also what you two represent is, not coincidentally, when you write from the heart and tell your story, it is going to connect with people because there's an unforced authenticity there. And I think what we're moving away from, I think one of the things I'm very optimistic about is it's always going to take the bottom line, the bean counters, they're going to catch up last, but we're getting, I think, more of an emphasis on not just authentic stories, but stories told from and I almost have to put that, right, because it seemed underrepresented, but by underrepresented meaning we don't have the token Black gay author, or, well, we have our Black woman book. I'm not suggesting it's always been that way, but there's certainly been too much of that. And I think what your books are doing is helping reconfigure what we would call, conventional wisdom, which is wrong. And I think that ties into this cultural moment we're in, where all we're talking about is this need to both look backward with respect and clear minds and say, what were we taught that is not the whole story, but also in terms of voices that are around now, how do we give them a platform and a voice?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was so terrified of in looking for a book deal was that some editor was going to want me to change my book with to cater to a white audience, to cater to the white gaze, because I'd heard about that from other, Black writers. And not only would that have been horrible just because that's not what I wanted, but now that I'm on the other side of this experience of having a book tour and those sorts of things, I can't imagine working this hard. As Brian said, sometimes you got events all day long for a book that I don't believe in, for a book that I'm no longer excited about, for a book that caters to an audience that is not the audience that I had in mind. I don't know if I don't think I could survive that, And so I'm excited and hopeful as you are, Sean, that what the success that we've seen that, Black authors have had in the last year or so is that publishing is kind of waking up and willing to challenge, and I hope more so, that conventional wisdom that says there can only be one, that says short stories don't sell, short story collections don't sell, and all of the things that have, caused publishing to be so white, such that, that New York Times op-ed showed that since the 1950, 5% of the fiction published by the big five have been published by people of color, and so those numbers are discouraging, but I'm hopeful that books like mine, books like Brian's, books like Kiese's and Robert Jones and Honore Jeffers, that publishing is paying attention and willing to be smart, right? Like, I don't even want to talk about it as if it's some, civil rights crusade. It's actually smart to pay attention to what our books are, have shown this year. And it's just, I think, a matter of willingness to let go of what's only worked for some people, a select few, and really move away from the gatekeeping and the elitism, because that's what it is. Nice foundation of white supremacy, but it's a lot of elitism and gatekeeping. And so I'm so ready for us to move beyond that.
Mm-hmm. I can't add to that. That's everything. That's everything I was thinking. I just want to write good books and have people read them, and that's what I thought I was doing, right? I was like, I'm trying to write a good book and I just want people to read my book, and I want, clearly, don't lie, you want people to like your book. And then I ran into, all this stuff about, who's going to read it and why, and demographics and like all these sort of things. And like it's just good business to invest in, different voices, diverse voices, I was talking to somebody yesterday and I was like, if you look at your bookshelf and it's all white dudes, like there's something wrong with you. just, you're not curious, you're incurious at that point. Or maybe you're just curious about the same thing over and over and over and over again, but yeah, I think that anybody who sits in front of a keyboard or puts pen to paper or or draws or does anything artistic, like they just want to do good work and they want to make a human connection. They don't want to make a specific kind of connection. I mean, sometimes you do, but it's learn about what other people connect to. I think it just helps humanity in general.
I don't want to be too cute, but I would almost say in the last, half century, we've seen it in academia and we've seen it in the literary industry. When you take a business first approach, you've got people without aesthetic skin in the game trying to make these decisions based on conventional wisdom. And to me, I've always struggled just as a so-called intellectual, going back to my undergrad years. And one of the reasons I'm a big proponent of humanities degrees is you're inculcated to be curious. You're inculcated to understand, to get the story, you need to hear a lot of stories, and that there is no book that exists that tells the story. So I think one of the things that we in the creative community wrestle with is, how is this not self-evident to anyone with a brain? I think what we're struggling with, and again, I'm optimistic about the cause, but what we're, I think, struggling with here is how to infuse that curiosity and impress upon people, without preaching to them. You'll understand America better if you understand other voices and you're not afraid to be culpable for your own myopia. We all are myopic to a certain extent. We're all enculturated and we all live in bubbles that we constantly should be seeking to get outside of. But I think that's something with world literature, right? Whether it's Ireland or Russia or 19th century American novels, there's a common theme, like Moby Dick, right? Get outside of your house and have an adventure and meet other people. Do you guys agree that there's nothing really profound? We just need to explore this curiosity and minimize the fear of the other and the fear of it broadening one's mind.
Well, I mean, I think it's not, incidental. I think, we, for so long, we've had this idea that, what is canon, and it's this very small subset of white men. And then we added a few white women, and then we added a few Black people. But the mindset is still this idea that there can only be a few, not just, but that somehow we don't want to throw wide open the doors for this multitude of stories, and that's just elitism, and so I think that has to be overcome, and I think we see that as we see, it's not coincidental, or not coincidental. It's noteworthy that my book won these awards, and it's from a university press. It's from a small press. And so now there's more. I've seen at least two big articles about these university presses and small presses and what's happening there, and how they are less invested in the gatekeeping than some of the bigger presses are. So what does that mean? That means more opportunities for writers like me and for writers like Brian. And so we need the larger industry to catch up then, and to be willing to do the same kind of thing. And it actually is asking the publishing industry to be more curious and to be more open, the same way we're saying we want readers to be, and so I think the readers are there. I think the readers want more, and I think publishing needs to rise to the occasion. But I definitely champion the work that university presses and small presses do, not just because of my book, but other friends have books that have done well this year and drawn a light on those presses. So I think that as consumers, as readers, we can drive some of that by giving our attention to those smaller presses. And sort of driving it from that end, and know that the big guys are paying attention. They really are paying attention.
That's right.
I think I think incuriosity also comes from a place where you think you have nothing to learn, you know, where you think that it's like Deesha said, like the gatekeeping, right? So you go to school and they tell you who, the most talented authors are. They give you 5 white dudes to read, so you read Hemingway and you read Thoreau. Nobody wants to read Walden. Nobody wants to read that book. Really, dear God. But anyway, so they give you this as a goal, right? They say, this is your goal. Once you understand these 5 books, you are an expert, and here's a piece of paper that tells you that you are. And then your curiosity stops. I've already it's this idea of hitting the pinnacle, right? This idea of I have already read the 5 books that I'm supposed to read, and now I am smart. And now anything that sort of interrogates that is wrong or beneath me or beneath the craft, or et cetera, et cetera. And it is gatekeeping. Incuriosity comes from a place where you don't think you have anything to learn, and you can apply that to just about anything. You can apply that to racism. You can apply that to patriarchy. You can apply that to capitalism. Once you are told that you have done this thing, that you are this thing, that then you really do start to believe that there is nothing else to learn, and it creates hierarchies. And those hierarchies, I think, keep people stupid.
Stupid in a false sense of that superiority, which, I'm not the least bit hesitant to get into political. I don't think we need to mar the discussion with a political word. But I also think what we're talking about, right? Let's name names. This has been the era. I think I hope it's an ongoing era of Black Lives Matter. This blowback, which I think for the most part, predictably, is cynical and calculated, the blowback to critical race theory, we're talking about that on a more societal level. We are correctly, I think, interrogating and championing the idea of, let's diversify the canon. Let's get rid of the canon. Let's establish a new canon. Okay, no one would disagree, at least in this room. But I think what we're seeing play out, right, politically or culturally, is this on a larger scale. What? So now you're telling me the history books are wrong? And again, I think to certain types of people that aren't threatened by that, it's of course we're telling you that. Let's hear the voices that were actually telling us other narratives. There's a certain type of person that doesn't want to hear those narratives, but there's a power structure. The hierarchy certainly doesn't want to interrogate that because it takes away their autonomy and authority.
Yeah, when I talk about it in my book, about the power of the television set in my home. It was this huge Magnavox TV set in the middle of the living room, and I would watch it every day. And all I kept seeing were white faces doing white things and solving white problems. And, I thought I was just watching the world. I thought that this is what the world was supposed to look like. And through that process, began sort of tacitly to think that there was something wrong with me, because I wasn't seeing my story. I wasn't seeing, happy Black families, except for Good Times. That was a damn good show. But I wasn't seeing successful Black people. I wasn't seeing so much of what would have, maybe made a light bulb go off in my head and seek out something else. So what we have, I think, is a country on a steady diet of the same that doesn't think that it has anything to learn from anywhere else or anybody else.
Well, and I think bringing together what you both said, what we have is a really dangerous situation where the people who have the most power have the least amount of historically accurate information, but who want to dominate the conversation because they don't think, they have anything to learn. And so you're finding now you've got people who are against what they think is critical race theory, saying that, Martin Luther King would agree with them, which shows how little they know about Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King said that was the problem with the white liberal in particular, but white people, that not thinking that they had anything to learn. And that is really going to be the death of all of us. Because if those folks didn't think they had anything to learn, but they didn't have any power, who cares? And they're just ignorant. But you've got ignorant people with the power, God help us.
Yeah, and throughout the course of this festival, I had the opportunity to talk to Lisa Ling, who literally travels the world, and we kind of joked about how appropriate Mark Twain's comment about travel makes you allergic to ignorance. Well, there's truth in that, but not everyone can travel. Not everyone has the luxury to travel. But thinking about cancel culture, and a lot of the stories are written about how this is a disaster, and the media, the social media is taken over. To me, again, I find this sweet spot of, I feel like in years past or decades past, these conversations were certainly happening in grad school seminars and maybe in the proverbial, speakeasies where writers allegedly get together in their, pointy hats. But what I think is beautiful, despite the noise, right? And we'd all agree, I think, it's info overload, et cetera, and you can pick and choose. But at least now with these mechanisms, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or email, blogs, these conversations are louder, and there's at least a chance for people like us or people that are fighting the good fight in academia or in the business world to ensure that we're having these discussions. So in a weird way, I take comfort in this blowback because that means we're being heard. If I think you just alluded to this, Deesha, correctly, if it was a tempest in a teapot, it'd be like, well, let them think that they're making a change and things will continue as they were. That SOP, I don't think applies anymore. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm certainly not rose-colored about the work we have to do, especially as white people. But I love the fact that this blowback is so furious because I think we're seeing a minority in terms of numbers that are very threatened by this change of the guard, which is way overdue.
The thing is, what gives me heart, and there are moments, politically where I look out and I'm like, oh dear God, please send a meteor, just wipe this fucking thing off the face of the earth. Well, that doesn't make any sense, but you know what I mean. But the thing that heartens me is that things don't ever stay the same. They may move at the pace of molasses, but things don't ever stay the same. There will be change, I hope, but it's just really slow in coming. And I have hope for, little kids that they'll actually, grow up in a better culture than the one that we have now. Because I'm growing up, I think, in a better culture slightly than my mother grew up in, So the change is slow, but I think that the voices that you mentioned will get louder and louder. And hopefully, positive changes will be made.
Well, I'll just be a spoiler, but the planet's dying quickly. And so it's like, well, there's this race.
Yep.
Wow.
No, I'm not, I mean.
No, there's an urgency. No, go on. I'm with you.
Yeah, there's an urgency. Yeah, we, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. So, I will admit to being, discouraged more often than not, but not so discouraged that, I won't keep writing my stories, because I think our stories still matter. I think our voices still matter. I think that our stories can get us through, and I heard that from people who read my book that came out in a pandemic, that it was a bright spot. It was a way to escape. It was comfort. And so I think our stories still matter, even as the world burns.
Yeah, and Deesha just bummed me out. I just want to say that after
this is what I'm here for, babe.
Yeah, after this, I'm just gonna go lay down on the couch and just not do anything for 48 hours. Like, thanks, Deesha.
No, sometimes we have to, sometimes we.
Your point is well taken. There's an urgency, and I think I'll bring us back from the abyss. I do think one thing we've lost, and I don't think this is I know it's not an original quote, but I've said many times in the 21st century, especially the last 5 years, I read more than I've ever read in terms of what I take in, and my eyesight proves that. But I read less books, and I've made a conscious effort in the last 2 years to read more books. And sometimes the most profound things are the simplest, right? Spending less time on social media, fight the battles, check in, be aware, be involved. But hey, literature and art is there, if not to save you, to offer sustenance and finding kindred spirits and putting some of this energy that otherwise might be lost in, chat room arguments into lifting up a book that mattered to you. And I'm saying this as an advocate for the arts, much less as a writer myself. There's always a way to channel some of this angst. Again, the angst is genuine and it's urgent, but there's also ways, I think, as a writing community, or those of you that aren't writers and want to support or make a difference, you can make a difference. Put a review on Amazon, put something in your Facebook feed, pick an author a week that you've read, living or dead, that you want to elevate. There are ways to combat the cynicism and not feel like, what does it matter? It's going to be lost in the seas of time anyway. All of us are going to be lost in the seas of time, but we can make difference and we can start small with the literary community.
I will not be lost in the seas of time. I am eternal, godlike.
Ozymandias.
I'm sorry, I keep derailing the conversation because when Deesha's here, I just want to cut up. I can only talk serious for so long when I look into that face because she's goofy and she's trying to act like she's not goofy in front of the people, but she's a goofball.
They don't
put him in his place.
No one's gonna believe you.
I see her talking and she's so smart and she's so eloquent. I'm like, do the thing you usually do when you're goofy. She won't do it. Fine.
There's a place. She's trying to keep. She's elevating us, Brian. She's.
You should have her cook.
We desperately need.
She cooks like a dream. Just if you're ever in town,
yes.
You can trick her. You can trick her into cooking for you.
Yes, if Sean ever comes to Pittsburgh, I'm cooking for you. Brian's coming over. It's a party.
Roadshow. That's all right. Book that.
Yes.
That's happening.
Yes.
Well, so there was really only two, and we're doing great on time, but there were two things, unless, of course, I want to cede the floor, but I was going to invite each of you to say a few words. I mean, I do think it's noteworthy that there's a Pittsburgh connection. So, you've both written about Pittsburgh, you both are from Pittsburgh, but I think for those that are checking this out now, again, I encourage you, first of all, go online and find the myriad things that both of these folks have written, not to mention their books and their interviews. You can see the 1455 interviews where we do a deep dive. But I think for people that are checking both of you out, it's also very instructive and inspirational in a society where we're obsessed with youth and, 10 under 20 or 30 or whatever. Neither of you had immediate success, and your stories speak to persistence and the rewards of doing the work and finding, if not joy, because it's not get carried away, but finding satisfaction and fulfillment in the work. It's a reminder to aspiring writers that this is a long slog and there's no guarantees of success. But I think, as I said at the outset, if you're not enjoying it on some level, what are you doing it for?
Yeah. So I'm good with age, and I think it's good for people to know. I've been writing for 20 years. I will be 50 in September, and Brian is older than me, so he doesn't have to tell you his age. Doesn't have to tell you his age.
Wow.
And so, I think that's really important that there's not a timeline on this. Even though, again, that conventional wisdom will, tell you that only certain people's stories, including people of a certain age, can do what Brian and I have proved, that you can do. And you don't have to be 30 and fresh out of an MFA program, though he's fresh out of an MFA program. I don't have an MFA. Neither of us are anywhere near 30. So, our books just.
Allegedly, Brian says allegedly.
Let me turn my Zoom filter up so people.
Toni Morrison famously published The Bluest Eye at 39. We're not unique. So I just want to really encourage people who are starting, who are just getting started, or they're 10 years in and it hasn't happened yet, There was a point where Brian and I were at that point. Well, you know, I think Brian, you're 10 years in right now. Is this like 10 years of writing for you?
Well, since I've been sober, so it's been 8.
8 years, yeah. But you know, it happens when it happens. And even after it happens, I think one thing that I can say probably safely for both myself and for Brian is that neither of us feels that this is it. You know, we have arrived. We wrote these books. I want to keep learning. I want to be a better writer. I want to grow as a writer. I want to take on writing challenges and grow new writing muscles. I don't know that I'll ever do memoir like Brian, but there are other types of writing that I want to do. And that's how we stay curious. You know, we are telling everybody else to be curious. You know, as writers, we've got to, you know, try new things out, be willing to mess up. But like Jamaica Kincaid said, you know, fail in the pursuit of something great rather than succeeding at something mediocre. She said it much better than that. So Brian, do you want to talk about being old and from Pittsburgh and living in Pittsburgh? I didn't mention Pittsburgh. My position on Pittsburgh is well documented. I'm leaving this bitch, but go ahead, Brian.
First of all, I'd like to say that age is nothing but a number. No, I'm old as fuck. Like, it's not even funny anymore. Like, it's not even funny. And I'll be honest, you know, I'll be completely honest. Like, I sometimes resent being old and this being my first book. There are times when I'm like, oh my God, I wasted so much time. You know, what could I have written by now if I hadn't been such a complete and utter ass clown for my entire life, you know? And I get down on myself, like, you know, and then I feel rushed, like, oh my God, I got to start my next book like right next week, and it has to be out by the end of the year. I have so much to do, you know, just work. And then there are days when I'm just like, well, first of all, if you had started writing earlier in life, the book that I've put into the world, which is a memoir, wouldn't be the same, nor maybe not even exist, you know? So it's kind of like, you know, asking yourself, what would my life be like if I had never been born? It's an unanswerable question. But, you know, I do sometimes think I should have stayed the course, you know, when I was younger, because I used to write, and then, you know, there was a huge derailment. But you know, so, but at the same time, you know, I just have to be grateful. It's one of the things you learn in recovery, to wake up every morning and make a gratitude list. Some days it's shorter than others, you know, but I always, when I get up in the morning, I put something on that list, just to try to center myself. You know, I'm incredibly fortunate to have this happening in my life right now, and it is nothing to sneeze at it. You know, I'm not going to be like, oh, a book with a, you know, New York Times, how Jejun, you know, like, that's not how I'm approaching this. But, you know, it did take a long time. But after, you know, it happens, like, you get your book into the world, you kind of forget about how long it took. You know, you kind of forget about those nights that you sat, you know, with your head in your hands, like, trying to, like, find the right word. You forget about that, and you just kind of bask in it for a second, and then it's on to the next thing. And that's what's exciting about it. It's on to the next thing. It gives you an opportunity to try new things. You know, I used to work in offices all the time, and every day was the same. And I'm going to tell both of you right now, please don't tell anybody. I used to keep a flask in my drawer because it was so, like, mind numbing. And I'm fortunate now to have every day be different. You know, that's one of the things. I actually wrote that on my gratitude list this morning. You know, as far as Pittsburgh is concerned, I've been here a lot longer than Deesha. You know, Deesha, as she says, her feelings about this city are well documented on Bloomberg, if you'd like to read them. I am uncertain as to what my future with this city is going to be. You know, I have a lot of history here, but, you know, maybe I'm holding on to the wrong things. I'm not sure, but we'll see. You know, onward and upward.
Absolutely. And listen, I think I really appreciate the idea of gratitude, because I think that's important for any artist, but really any human being. And I'll say, I'm older than both of you. And,
What?
and, you know, speaking of sneezing, Brian, when you get to an age where you can throw your back out sneezing,
Oh my God.
you become grateful. So
I just want to say, I was making a peanut butter jelly sandwich the other night and I threw my back out. So yeah.
So on a fundamental level, I do think that's one blessing of aging gracefully. You are obliged to recognize, hey, it's good to be alive. It's good to be engaged. But I think there's I think there's a profound message for us and for anyone paying attention, which is, you know, having the gratitude and feeling the urgency. There's a balance there, and it always comes back to balance and balancing the need to get the work done, because that it ain't going to do itself. And that separates, let's face it, that separates most writers from the pretenders, just that right there. And that's true of athletics and any endeavor, really. But having a gratitude for the opportunity to do it. And for me, that's why I try to remain a happy warrior, right? There's so much work to be done personally, professionally, on an organizational level. But if every day I'm curious and I'm meeting new people, that's one way to keep cynicism at bay and stay in the fight.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's, you know, it's also just a great way, you know, it's weird because so many of these lessons, like, you know, I started writing my book when I was in rehab, and I was doing this thing where I was like writing in my room and then going to group therapy. And it's amazing how much the group therapy actually helped my writing. And, you know, the woman who led the group therapy group was just trying to keep me sober, but a lot of the lessons that she taught in that room were all you can also apply to just life in general and also to writing. You know, I'm writing a memoir and I would go into group therapy, and she, trying to get me sober, would say, "What are you hiding? What aren't you saying?" You know, and then I would go back to my room and be like, "What am I hiding? What aren't I saying?" You know, and then I would write it. So there's just this weird symbiosis between like being in rehab, you know, and also, you know, getting back to writing. You know, I would go and get these boosts, you know, from group therapy, and then I would go write. And I think that ultimately helped make the book better.
Absolutely. Deesha, thoughts along the line of gratitude and so forth?
I appreciate the reminder from Brian, because I started a gratitude journal at the outset of the pandemic, and I haven't kept up with it. And I haven't thought about it. I can't remember the last time I wrote in it. It's been months, many months. So thank you, Brian, for that reminder, because that is very grounding. And it was one of the things that I think kept me tethered and kept me okay during the pandemic, because that's how I started every morning. And I, for one, welcome another quarantine shutdown. I do. I think we need it. But personally, that taking that pause really was essential for me. And I've been trying to hold on to so many good things that came out of that time, but that's one that's gotten away. So thank you for that reminder.
Anytime.
I don't think we could possibly end on a better note than that, other than to say, with obvious sincerity, you know, it's a tremendous blessing for me to have met and befriended both of you, to watch the ascent. This is what we do this for. I want to thank both of you, taking the time out of your very busy and productive schedules to chat. I'm certain that there's a lot of people watching this that are going to be inspired. And not least, for those of you that have not gotten on board yet, punch me up to the gods, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, and seek these two writers out online. Again, the books are easily recommended, and you are missing out if you haven't checked them out. But these are fascinating people, and your life will be enriched by having both of their presences in your world. So those are my closing thoughts. And there's our pitch man.
Marketing and Promotions by Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is going to be my next career, marketing and promotion.
Sean, thank you. Thank you so much. We always have the best conversation, so I really appreciate you.
Well, maybe we can live stream our dinner in Pittsburgh, and we can turn that into a.
I'm down. I am so down. And you know who'll be there?
Ooh, Fudgy.
And that was, I was gonna say, closing thoughts. Can we get a little fudgy? So yes.
Fudgy's like, I was asleep. I don't know what this is about, but okay, I'm permitted to go back to sleep.
Thank you so much, Sean. Really, thank you for having me again. I really do very much appreciate it. It's always great.
The pleasure is mine. And like I said, I'll leave with a gratitude and a request. The door's always open. So, we'll check in with both of you. We want to follow what's going on, and you're always welcome. So we'll see you both again soon. And thank you. Be well and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.